Hello, and welcome to the Watcher's review of The Deadly Assassin. Please be aware there are spoilers ahead. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can be alerted to more content. The Doctor returns to his home planet of Gallifrey after being summoned, only to find himself framed for the assassination of the Lord President. However, he soon realises there is more to it when, upon discovering that the Master is also back on Gallifrey. The Deadly Assassin picks up where the previous story, The Hand of Fear, finished off, with the Doctor leaving Sarah Jane Smith on Earth upon his summons. Behind the scenes, Sarah Jane Smith actress Elizabeth Sladen had expressed the desire to leave Doctor Who the previous season beforehand, but was convinced to stay by producer Philip Hinchcliffe for a couple of stories for season 14. Although Tom Baker had a great acting chemistry with his co-star, he sought the departure of Elizabeth Sladen for the Doctor to go solo without a companion. Producer Philip Hinchcliffe and script editor Robert Holmes didn't view this as a viable long-term setup, but agreed that it would be an interesting experiment set up for a one-off story, which brings us to The Deadly Assassin. Tom Baker's acting performances, in particular in Doctor Who, hold a certain type of gravitas, as well as his ability to change the mood and feel of the character in such an instant, down in part to his own unique personality. With the absence of a companion figure, this allows him to go full range on the characteristics of the Fourth Doctor, which he alters at the same time the feel of the narrative also changes, as well as bringing in some new ideas, in particular a narrated prologue at the beginning of the story. Episode 1 brings us to the build-up of the President's assassination, which the Doctor has already experienced in a premonition leading him to try and prevent this from happening, whilst at the same time trying to evade capture from the Castellan guards, due to him causing a security breach upon his arrival in the capital on Gallifrey. Due to this, he only talks to 3 characters in the whole episode, and none of them are key characters. Usually, an opening episode is establishing the events with the Doctor explaining things to the companion, who acts as audience representation. Instead, the Doctor spends a lot of the episode talking to himself, which fits in well with his persona, but the absence of the companion, you get the feeling that in particular, you as the audience are being directly treated as the companion, and as such you start to become drawn more into the narrative. For the majority of episode 2, the Doctor is under trial and facing the threat of execution, but is seemingly calm with this threat lingering over him, and acts cunningly to abuse a legal loophole in prolonging the execution order to prove his innocence. He then goes into typical Fourth Doctor mockery of the establishment, in this case the Time Lords, by rubbishing their aging technology and the mundane sheltered life they live. For the remainder of episode 2 and all of episode 3, the Doctor experiences the nightmarish world of the Matrix, a virtual reality created by a computer which stored the memories of Time Lords and was used to send a premonition of the President's assassination to the Doctor in the first place. Due to the random nightmarish nature of the Matrix the Doctor experiences, you see Tom Baker give his most physical performance as the Time Lord, and probably the most physical performance ever seen by the Doctor in the classic series so far, as he plays a cat and mouse game with a then unknown enemy, and coming out barely surviving. This is a physical portrayal that out of the 4 actors to have played the Doctor by this time, only Tom Baker could have really done. William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton weren't known for physical interactions, in particular involving violence, and although John Pertwee's portrayal of the Doctor displayed hand-to-hand combat skills, Tom Baker gets not only involved in hand-to-hand combat, but gets shot at, drowned, fall out of trees, and although some of the work was carried out by a stunt double, he certainly goes that extra mile in these scenes. By episode 4, we reach the climax of the story where the Fourth Doctor finally meets the Master for the first time. The Fourth Doctor would cross swords with the Master 3 times during his tenure, with 3 different actors playing the role, but here he sets up a blueprint of their relationship that purposely goes against the relationship displayed between the Third Doctor and Roger Delgado's portrayal of the Master, which was built on a mutual respect and a memory of 2 individuals who were once close friends. With the Fourth Doctor and Peter Pratt's portrayal of the Master, they still maintain the mutual respect in intelligence and abilities, but there is now a certain coldness in their relationship, with the Doctor openly highlighting the Master's psychotic and sadistic tendencies, before once again defeating his rival and saving the day. In all, I personally feel that this is one of Tom Baker's strongest and most varied performances as the Doctor, and the narrative concentrates on the character involvement in the storyline due to the absence of scenes where the Doctor would normally be distracted in rescuing his companion, or the narrative being slowed down for an explanation to them. This suits Tom Baker to fully spread his wings and explore every aspect of his incarnation of the Time Lord, and perhaps more than any other of his stories, you feel drawn and focused on him in almost every scene he is in. Prior to The Deadly Assassin, the Master had been exclusively played by Roger Delgado. Alas, in 1973, Delgado died in a car accident in Turkey, but had he survived, then the original idea was into featuring a third Doctor story called The Final Game, which would have given more backstory to the Doctor's arch enemy, and would have possibly finished the character off for good. As we know, this never came about, and the fate of Delgado's incarnation of the Master was unknown beyond his last screen appearance in Frontier in Space. Like the Doctor, the Master, also being a Time Lord, is capable of regeneration. Despite this loophole to allow for recasting, Philip Hinchcliffe and script editor Robert Holmes made the conscious idea of exploring new enemies rather than reusing the Master in the same manner predecessors Barry Letts and Terrance Dicks had done. By the time The Deadly Assassin came about, though, in 1976, it had been over 3 seasons since we last saw the character, in which time Hinchcliffe and Holmes saw it as enough time passing to bring him back. As previously mentioned, the relationship between the Fourth Doctor and the Master is different to the relationship between the character had with the Third Doctor, and this is down to Hinchcliffe and Holmes making yet another conscious decision in not revisiting old territory and taking the opportunity of recasting the Master to explore new forms of the personality and traits in a similar way to what is carried out when the Doctor is recast. Here, the Master is portrayed as being at the end of his regeneration cycle, and as such appears in an emaciated form with a skull-like appearance, with rotting flesh, and shrouded in a weathered cloak, which is already a world away from the charming, debonair appearance Roger Delgado gave off. The realisation of him being at the end of his natural life leads to him giving off this air of desperation as well as bitterness and hatred, not only to the Doctor, who naturally seems healthy and wholesome, but to the Time Lords and Gallifrey as a whole. Being at the end of his life makes him rather reduced in his capabilities and movement, giving a frail imagery of someone dying, but still driven by hatred and revenge, and on top of this, his face is expressionless, leading to the audience only understanding what he's experiencing through his voice. Due to this, Peter Pratt, an actor experienced in theatrical work and known for his voice style, as well as being a trained opera singer, was chosen for the role of the Master, which for me is a stroke of genius, as he perfectly manages to portray the Time Lord purely through his vocal talents, in a way where his rich tone sticks long after watching the story, in a way I feel has only been matched by Michael Wisher and his portrayal as Davros in Genesis of the Daleks. Regarding the Master, it is he who orchestrates the Doctor's summons to Gallifrey, and manages to intercept the premonition of the President's assassination from the Matrix, and beam it into the Doctor's mind, to elaborately lure our hero into a trap. The usual traits of playing to a character's passions and weaknesses are still present, as the Master manages to use Chancellor Goth as a puppet in his schemes, as well as using his hypnotic powers on a Chancellor guard, and using his tissue compression eliminator to murder his victims. In the end, all this scheming of framing the Doctor, using others to carry out his dirty work, and bringing chaos and destruction to Gallifrey, is simply in order to prolong his life beyond its natural end. In general narrative speaking, the desperation of an antagonist makes them perhaps more dangerous, as they are willing to break their own moral code and prioritise themselves above all else, and in this case, the Master personifies all of that. Now, before we proceed with my next character, I have to warn you of some potential spoilers, and will leave it to your own decision if you wish to skip past this part. Chancellor Goth is a high-ranking Time Lord who is earmarked for being a successor to the President upon his resignation day, which also turns out to be the day he is assassinated. While respected by his peers, he is in fact secretly corrupt, and as the story unfolds, it transpires that he has been working with what he thought was in league with the Master. However, he finds out that he's been used by the Doctor's archenemy. His reasoning for assassinating the President on Resignation Day was due to him discovering that he was not going to be named as the successor, despite everyone's assumptions. The Master taps into his corruption by assisting Goth and making him believe he is helping him get the role of President, when in fact he is being used by the Master, so the antagonist can obtain access to the tools the President holds in his possession. As a politician, Goth gives off the impression of a well-respected individual wanting to apply full punishment on the Doctor, whilst not knowing his true intentions. When finding out his true desires, his actions against the Doctor are then viewed in a whole new light. When the Doctor delves into the Matrix, he finds himself at odds with various characters, including a samurai warrior, a surgeon, railway workman, a clown, and a pilot, before getting involved in a cat-and-mouse hunt with a hunter-like character with his face hidden. As episode 3 progresses, the hunter eventually transpires to be Goth, who also modelled the nightmarish world in the Matrix. This then allows the audience to realise that the cloaked figure murdering and sabotaging in the shadows was Goth all along, which then completes the characterisation as a multi-layered, multi-personality type of character. To a point, Goth also acts as an extension of the Master, by doing his bidding, as he replicates certain characteristics such as the wearing of the cloak, similar voice patterns, and a manic laughter whilst in the Matrix. The role of Goth was played by Bernard Horsfall, who had already had a long association with Doctor Who, and had the acting ability to give off the role of a determined politician, whilst also being a physical match for Tom Baker, in terms of build and height for the fight scenes in The Matrix. In addition to playing Goth, he also plays characters in The Matrix that the Doctor comes across. As with most other Robert Holmes scripted stories, The Deadly Assassin has a rich tapestry of characters other than the key players. In particular, you have Coordinator Engin, who is an archivist, and Castellan Spandrel, who acts as a head of security and is seemingly the only character willing to give the Doctor a chance to prove his innocence. Both of these characters assist the Doctor throughout the story and end up being a sort of double act that bounce off each other, regardless of whether the Doctor is sharing a scene with them or not. This is a trademark of Robert Holmes' stories, which he would often use to varying effects throughout his writing career on Doctor Who. You also have the character of Cardinal Baruza, who is another well-respected politician within the story, and acts as a voice of reason to balance out Goth's determination to have the Doctor executed. Upon the revelation of Goth's corruption and the Master's involvement, Baruza sets about formulating a series of fictional events to preserve Goth's respectability and to make him a hero in defeating the Master, and allow the Doctor to boot in and out of events in exchange for his freedom. Baruza also holds a special relationship with the Doctor, as it transpires before entering politics. He was the Doctor's teacher when he was a student at the Academy, before the Doctor actually left Gallifrey. Over the next 7 years, Baruza would go on to be a recurring character featuring all the Gallifrey set stories until 1983's The Five Doctors, with the Doctor holding a rare respect for him due to their teacher-student role that they held in the past. The Deadly Assassin was written by Robert Holmes, who was also the script editor at the time. As previously mentioned, the basic premise for the story was built on Tom Baker's viewpoint that the Doctor didn't need a companion to travel with, and Holmes took the opportunity to experiment with this idea, whilst also making a point that a companionless setup isn't viable long term. Holmes took a lot of influence from Richard Condon's 1959 novel, The Manchurian Candidate, and its 1962 film adaptation, which tells the story of American soldiers brainwashed into becoming assassins. In fact, the ending to episode 1 is directly inspired by the climax to the film. Mixed into the narrative, Robert Holmes delves into American politics to the point of naming the assassination victim as a president as opposed to a British political title or royal title. Scandals such as the assassination of JFK and Watergate add inspiration to corruption and altering events that the Doctor finds himself immersed in during the story. Holmes was also a master of satirising present-day events and writing them into his scripts, and The Deadly Assassin is no exception. Prior to this story, the Time Lords had appeared as godlike observers of the universe, but here Robert Holmes strips that veneer away to reveal a system of decadence, and political viewpoints have not given straight answers, as the Doctor comments with Goth, and though willing to alter the truth of events to preserve public morality and faith in the system. Holmes reflects a lot of this with the traditions and pomp and circumstance, in particular of the British political system, royal traditions, and as well as the Christian religious figures, by borrowing titles such as cardinal and having members of the High Council wear robes akin to bishops, cardinals, and even popes. The Deadly Assassin is the first story to be set entirely on Gallifrey, and Robert Holmes, having already written the first ever story to feature the Master in Terror of the Autons, as well as the introduction of the name of the Doctor's home planet in another one of his stories, The Time Warrior, takes the opportunity to use this story to build a tapestry of Time Lord and Gallifreyan culture, which is still used as a foundation point in Doctor Who today. I've already touched upon how he introduced the political structure of Gallifrey, but he also delves into its history by creating the backstory of Rassilon and how he brought the Time Lords power. He adds substance to the natural limit of regenerations for Time Lords. He introduces the shadowy and seldom seen Celestial Intervention Agency, also known as the CIA, as well as the concept of the Matrix, amongst other ideas littered throughout the story. And with myself having seen the show up to the present day, it's interesting to go back and watch The Deadly Assassin and see how much of it was introduced by Robert Holmes in this story. Despite building a lot of the story on political scandal, Robert Holmes clearly knew he couldn't maintain 4 episodes without the narrative becoming stretched or stale. In reaction to this, for approximately 1/3 of the story, he takes the Doctor and Goth away from the Gallifrey setup and places them in this nightmarish world within the Matrix. And while not so much flipping the narrative on its head, but providing something new, exciting and tense for the audience to become indulged in, with not so much adding to the narrative, but making the whole point of travelling to the Matrix to expose the assassin as a Hitchcockian style MacGuffin, which lends itself for Holmes to write in a sequence of scenarios that keeps the audience on the edge of their seat and trying to work out how the Doctor finds his way out of the Matrix. When we are then brought back to Gallifrey for the final act of the story, it becomes a traditional Doctor versus Master confrontation within the confines of Gallifrey again. With the change in the setting and narrative focus, Robert Holmes successfully keeps this narrative fresh and devoid of padding, while simultaneously fitting in a lot of ideologies and structure without being overbearing on the audience. The Deadly Assassin was directed by David Maloney, who was also one of the show's most experienced directors, with this being his 7th contribution to the show, and his debut stretching back to the Patrick Troughton era. During his tenure, he had been entrusted with key stories such as the War Games and Genesis of the Daleks, or challenging shoots such as The Mind Robber and Planet of Evil, and having already tackled stories during the Hinchcliffe era of Doctor Who, he seems the natural choice. Known for getting dramatic effect, one of his methods was applying the freeze frame to the episode endings, in this case for episode 1, but more controversially for the end of episode 3, where a frozen shot was applied with the Doctor's face immersed underwater while being drowned. This famously resulted in complaints from the National Viewers and Listeners Association that was spearheaded by Mary Whitehouse. The majority of the filming for The Deadly Assassin was studio-based, with design work carried out by Roger Murray Leach, who worked exclusively during the Philip Hinchcliffe era of the show. Presented with the challenge of designing the halls and galleries of the Gallifrey capital, he opts for a neutral green effect on the walls that gives off an effect of being made from glass, reducing the amount of sharp edges when it came to filming. Part of the requirements of the script was to give an epic large feel to the Panopticon, where a lot of the events take place, in particular the assassination scenes. Naturally, with the budgets Doctor Who worked with, this requirement had to be realised in a different way, so with David Maloney's expertise, the use of high-angle shots was used as well as composite shots, where the extras were filmed in one particular portion of the set and reshot in different places from the same camera angle, which was then edited together to give off the impression of being a more busy area. Another way of cost reduction was by keeping the green glass design feature throughout all of the Gallifrey shots, but adjust the lighting and dressing to give off the appearance of another room, such as Goth's office, Engin's archive room, or even the Master's lair. Another touch applied by Murray Leach was the recycling of a Celtic-inspired symbol previously used in Revenge of the Cybermen, and dotted in various parts of the set, which would later be known as the Seal of Rassilon, and used throughout the show even to this day. Location shooting was required for the Matrix scenes, and David Maloney opts for using Betchworth Quarry in Surrey as the centrepiece, which he had already used in Genesis of the Daleks for the surface of Skaro. He divulges further by also using Brockham Limeworks Railway located near the quarry, as well as the Royal Alexander and Albert School for the swamp scenes, also not far from the quarry. Additional scenes were also carried out at Wickham Air Park in Buckinghamshire for the plane scenes. To complement Roger Murray Leach's design work, James Akerson and Joan Ellicott reach out to similar influences for the costume design, which, as mentioned before, in particular with the members of the High Council, takes inspiration from Christian clergy dresswear. What is important with their costume designs is that they are used as a standard for all future Gallifrey-orientated stories going forward. The Deadly Assassin was originally broadcasted as 4 episodes from the 30th of October to the 20th of November 1976, as the third story of season 14, averaging in 12.2 million viewers. Although now viewed as one of the strongest stories of the Tom Baker era, it wasn't without criticism, in particular from Mary Whitehouse as mentioned earlier, with the story being too scary, which ultimately had a profound effect on Doctor Who, taking a lighter tone when Philip Hinchcliffe moved on and was replaced by Graham Williams for the following season. I feel you could do a whole video over the horrors and violence of Doctor Who. I personally feel that Whitehouse misjudged the audience, in particular the younger viewers, who perhaps seemed more compelled with the scares and horrors playing into their own human nature. Doctor Who has had plenty of scary moments before and since The Deadly Assassin, and while I can understand her initial concern over the freeze-frame ending of episode 3, I feel the younger viewers would be more intrigued about how the Doctor gets himself out of the perilous situation, rather than being concerned if he actually died. Additional further criticism came from some of the fans themselves, in particular founder of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society, Jan Vincent Rudsky, who initially lambasted the representation of the Time Lords as human-like corrupt politicians, rather than the godlike aura that they gave off in earlier brief appearances. However, in my opinion, Robert Holmes had to write the Time Lords as less godlike in order for the narrative to work around characters who weren't pure and above corruption, as you would imagine godlike beings to be, which gives the opportunity of a more multi-dimensional character such as Chancellor Goth. Their ignorance and varying personalities paints a picture of a society that, although is powerful, is also vulnerable and can be easily manipulated, as shown here with the inclusion of the Master. With all the backstory, depth given to the Time Lords, Gallifrey, and even the Doctor, while still maintaining his mystery, you could argue that Deadly Assassin is probably one of the most influential stories in the show's history. Other Time Lords and Gallifrey stories would appear more frequently in the show, and they all go by the blueprint set in The Deadly Assassin. And even shows that don't feature Time Lords other than the Doctor still use The Deadly Assassin as a reference point. You could argue that no other story since the first ever story, An Unearthly Child, has gone on and laid as much foundation and backstory in Doctor Who as much as The Deadly Assassin. Yes, Genesis of the Daleks also is a reference point story, but almost purely from a Dalek point of view, where The Deadly Assassin I feel covers more bases. As a fan, The Deadly Assassin is my own personal favourite story from the classic era, and not purely down to its game-changing markers. The script itself is excellently written by Robert Holmes as ever, but it pushes the boundaries about what the show can realistically do. It mirrors real-life situations based around power and corruption, and particularly within politics, but is also surreal and nightmarish with the use of the Matrix, opening up the horizons of Doctor Who storytelling by creating a structure fundamentally without rules or boundaries. But on top of that, it is full of suspense in both narrative and scare factor for the audience, which the show heavily feasted on even to this day. The script is also packed with a narrative of strong, interesting characters, and gives the Master a new dimension as well as a backstory, and doesn't allow itself to become padded or slow down the storytelling together with its two extreme settings, and this allows the deadly assassin to be fast-paced, even when the scenes are mostly dialogue-orientated. On top of the script, Tom Baker makes the most of the opportunity of having a companion-free storyline, but is supported by some great acting performances from other characters, in particular Bernard Horsfall's the corrupt Goth, Peter Pratt providing a mesmerising master interpretation almost purely through his voice. So, that concludes my review of The Deadly Assassin. Of course, it is only my opinion, so feel free to express your own in the comments if you think differently. Be sure to tune in for my next video, but if you do have a suggestion for a story for me to review, then just let me know. But remember, it's the end, but the moment has been prepared for.